Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about Rick Warren's speech at the Lausanne Congress, number 4. Now, Rick Warren is a pretty heretical pastor. We've talked a lot about Rick Warren. He famously tried to lead the charge for Southern Baptists to embrace female pastors. So basically, discard tradition, embrace egalitarian heresy and heterodoxy. And his church is also pretty gay affirming. They got connections to Andy Stanley's gay affirming nonsense that he does at his church. So Rick Warren, pretty bad guy, and very much I want to be popular and very egotistical pastor as well. So he's at this Lausanne Congress. The Lausanne Congress is a movement that's been around since the 70s. They've always been about ESG. They called it something different at the time, but that's basically what it is, but in the church. Very big on environmentalism and very big on social justice. This past Congress, they've condemned nationalism, which you hate to see that they pretty much are promoting open borders and, let people invade your countries type of thing. And the Lausanne movement is the faith statement that a lot of churches use, a lot of bad churches. If you ever see a church say Lausanne covenant on their website, red flag, move on to another church. And the He Gets Us campaign uses the Lausanne movement because in part, Ed Stetzer is the theological brains in the United States of the He Gets Us campaign. He's also like the North American head of the Lausanne movement in these parts. So there's a lot of red flags surrounding this movement. Ed Stetzer is also gay affirming, by the way. His outlet, Church Leaders, is probably the most gay affirming of the Christian news outlets out there, even more than Christianity Today, which we've talked about a lot here. So Lausanne movement's pretty big. I don't know if the Chosen's connected to Lausanne at all, but I know Ed Stetzer's connected to the Chosen in some ways. He's a big promoter of that as well. But the He Gets Us campaign does reference the Lausanne covenant. So with that said, and the Lausanne covenant does have like the ESG language in it, by the way. So with that said, let's dive into this story. But first, I want you to know, Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. I've been waiting to report on this story for a while. Because in part I knew it was happening when it happened, but they didn't release a speech until much later. And then, we've had a lot of other issues to cover. So I'm finally getting to talk about this. Rick Warren does, defend female pastors at this, and he makes up some pretty nifty and convenient lies to do so. But this is our Patreon-like system. You can support it at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. Also, check out my book, Winning, Not Winsome, 10 Commandments of Spiritual Warfare. That's also linked in the description below. And the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, to the podcast, if you are new. So this is the video, and let's watch it. It'll be at normal speed. And this is in Seoul and also Incheon, so South Korea, by the way. And this is what he's saying to the Global Congress.
Start by saying, as we come to a close of another great Lausanne Congress, I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm grateful for you. I thank God for you. I pray for you, and I want to help you. Now, if you are under 40 years of age, would you just stand up real quickly? Under 40 years of age, please stand up. Okay, look at these leaders. All right, let me talk to you for just a second. I'm more impressed with this generation than 4 or 5 different generations that I've ever worked with. I'm impressed with you. And you have the potential to finish the task and complete the Great Commission. But you're going to need 4 things.
So I want to pause right there because he does have a very flawed premise that, it is in our power, it is in our capability to finish the Great Commission. Now, again, my eschatology is that Jesus could return tomorrow. He's not waiting for, people who don't believe in him to construct a third temple. He's not waiting for a series of events to take place. He could return tomorrow if he so desired. So it's up to Jesus when the Great Commission's complete. We don't get to measure when the Great Commission's done. And I think it's a flawed premise to assume that we're going to be the generation that does it. I don't know if there's an eschatological bent to Rick Warren's belief system there, but it is worth mentioning.
To make it to the finish line, you're going to need mentors, models, partners, and friends. Everybody in ministry to make it to this is my 54th year of ministry. You need mentors, models, partners, and friends. I was 20 years old at the first Lausanne. And so I've watched this movement for 50 years. And I want to say thank you for all you're doing. If you need help with anything, just email me. Okay, be seated. Now, if you are over 40, would you stand up right now? Would you stand up? All right. Those of you who just stood, the young leaders, look at the people who are over 40 around you. These are the people you should be learning from. You can learn from anybody if you know the right questions. All leaders are learners. These people have already been in ministry for years, and they can teach you things that you don't know. You may be seated. Now, my prayer for both of these groups is that you will finish well. I have given my life to finishing the task of the Great Commission, but also helping church leaders finish their race. And I want you to do both. Now, as this Lausanne ends, I just was thinking about how could I help you the most in 9 minutes? And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you an outline. It's on your table. Everybody pass them around. I'm going to give you an outline that summarizes the action steps about everything we've talked about this last week. And you take this home and you teach it. First time you use, say, Rick says. Second time you use it, say, it's been said. Third time you use it, you say, I've always thought. And you can teach this. It summarizes what we've talked about all week. Now, each morning we've looked at the book of Acts. And I want to take a minute to just quickly look at 10 action steps through the book of Acts. Now, I'm not going to teach this to you. I don't have time to do it. I'm not even going to cover the verses. I'm going to give you the fill-ins. So write quick. And then you take it, you add your illustrations and your stories, okay?
So I guess he's doing a little docent research group on these people. So anyway, he's about to say something that's incredibly wrong, I believe, right here.
I don't have time to teach it. The big idea between this outline is this. The church at its birth was the church at its best. The church at its birth was the church at its best. So what?
This is entirely wrong. This is a very wrong way to think about the church. It is said by people who generally hate the church are the people who say that, the church has only gone downhill since the first century. That is what people who hate the church say. I don't believe that for a second. I believe that God has guided the church to get better and better, and the church is not getting worse over time. The church is actually getting better over time, and you love to see that, actually. And God is guiding the church. God is helping the church get better over time, to reach more people over time, to save more people and many people over time. So God's helping the church get better. I don't think God wanted to grow the church, and the church is growing. The gates of hell are not prevailing against it. I don't believe for a second that the church at its infancy was the best that the church would ever be. This is a very poor way to think about it. It is what Rick Warren says. It is what Andy Stanley says. It is what a host of false teachers say. They want to fetishize the early church so that they can introduce, crazy foreign ideas into the equation and undermine sound doctrine and teaching.
What must we do to finish the task? 10 action steps from Acts chapter 1 and chapter 2. We've been talking about it all week. Number 1, we must pray for God's power. You're going to have to look and read these and study these verses yourself. Prayer is mentioned many times in the book of Acts. Friends, when we start praying like they prayed in Acts, we'll start having the power like they had in Acts. There's a direct connection between prayer and power. Much prayer, much power. Little prayer, little power. No prayer, no power. Number two.
Again, there is an arrogant assumption that no one is like as successful a prayer warrior, and I wouldn't consider myself a prayer warrior. I just don't think I'm on that level. I want to be on that level someday for sure, and I want to grow on that level specifically. But there have got to be some prayer warriors out there that, again, disprove his point. You know, the idea that no prayer, no power, and stuff like that. I just think that's a very arrogant point. The idea that no one can pray, good enough like the people in Acts did. And I don't think that's a valid criticism of the modern church. I think people are praying. I think there are people who are so gifted that they are praying on the same level. I'm not saying everyone, I'm not saying collectively as a whole, but I'm saying that there are some pretty gifted people out there.
We must translate God's word for everyone. God's word is alive. God's word is transforming. God's word changes life, but we have to put it in words that everybody understands. We must translate God's word for everyone. And sadly, there's still thousands, even millions of people who don't have a Bible in their translation. That's part of our next action step.
I don't disagree with this point, actually. I think it's good to translate the Bible into more vernacular languages.
Now, at Pentecost, God showed the importance of translation because he did a translation miracle with tongues. He reversed Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, at Pentecost. We must translate God's word for everyone. Number three, we must appreciate our diversity. Not tolerate it, not accept it, but be proud of it, love it, celebrate it. We need to do this because, number one, diversity was God's idea. He thought it, he made us all different. The person who doesn't like diversity is basically saying, God, you made a mistake. Why didn't you make everybody like me? That's the height of pride. We must celebrate and enjoy and grow on our diversity because diversity in ministry is a strength of the church, not a weakness.
So you got the soundbite of diversity is our strength by Rick Warren. There is a sense in what he's saying is true, but he's like being so general that he's not applying, the idea of loving diversity in its proper context in a proper way. It is so vague that it does open the door to wokeness, which obviously the Lausanne movement is very woke. Again, the America sent some pretty woke people to the Lausanne Congress this time around. Ed Stetzer, Trevin Wax, Rick Warren, all three of those guys are pretty woke. So when they hear that, they're going to be celebrating diversity in a non-biblical sense, and it's going to be more of a cultural understanding of celebrate diversity rather than a church way of, hey, there's believers in this country, there's believers in that country, there's believers in, Nigeria and Armenia and Serbia, and we all have this common connection in it, and that is our faith in Christianity. So there's a sense of what he's saying is true, but he's using the wokest buzzwords to convey it.
Why? It takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. And if you're getting the job done, I like the way you're doing it. God blesses diversity.
And that just sounds like if you're putting butts in seats, you're doing a good job, which, again, mega church mentality. If we're putting butts in seats, we're doing our job. Many kinds of churches. And again, I have, high church, low church. There's a lot of different types of churches out there that I think are good. But, there is a mega church mentality there of, more butts in seats means we're doing our job right.
In God's church, he wants unity. He doesn't want uniformity. Now, if you don't get anything else I say in these 6 minutes left or whatever's left, the only way we'll ever have unity is to love diversity. Write that down. The only way we'll ever have unity is to love diversity. Number 4, we must train every believer to preach the good news. You know, at Pentecost, Peter had to quote Joel, the prophet, in order to explain why women were preaching at Pentecost. And here's what he says in Acts 2:14 and following. I will pour out my spirit on everyone, circle everyone. Your sons and daughters, circle sons and daughters, not just sons, daughters will preach. Your young men will see vision, and your old men will have dreams. That's intergenerational. And all my servants, both men and women, circle men and women, I will pour out my spirit, and they will preach.
So again, this is where he argues that, Acts prescribes that women should be pastors. And again, not really in the text. And you'll notice that he changes the word prophesy in verse 17 to preach. And your sons and daughters shall prophesy. And I don't know what translation he's using, because I looked up a lot of translations. And even the fruity translations out there, the ones that are very nutty, like even the Message says prophesy. So there are a lot of bad translations out there, even like the contemporary ones, the more thought for thought, or even a lot of the paraphrase ones, they use prophesy. So what cherry-picked translation is he using, or did he just use the same, a regular conventional translation of this passage right here and substitute prophesy for preach, which is dishonest? That is very dishonest. And the idea that Rick Warren would lie about the text in order to justify female pastors is not surprising, but it is pretty flagrant, because you can just look in the Bible, see what he gave the chapter and verse, and then just mistranslated it in order to make a theological point. And that theological point is that women can be pastors. And again, this is, in my mind, this is heresy. The people that introduced this into the church were heretics. And that includes Rick Warren trying to lead the Southern Baptist Convention down this path. Every denomination that has accepted female pastors has gone by the wayside. They've adopted, they've sacrificed biblical inerrancy. They've promoted homosexuality. There aren't really exceptions to this. There aren't meaningful exceptions to this. Or they've gone woke. They're not really meaningful exceptions to this. It is liberalism. Female pastors is liberalism. That is like the bare, there's biblical inerrancy. If you deny that, you're a theological liberal. But if you believe in and support female pastors, you are theologically liberal. You have adopted feminism. You've not adopted a historic Christian position.
In 2003 at Saddleback Church, we launched an every member campaign that every member in our church would go to the mission field and plant a church. Did you hear that? Every member in our church would go to the mission field and plant a church. And we took the 5 things that Jesus did, we call it the peace plan: proclaim the good news, equip every believer, alleviate suffering, that's for poverty, disease, illiteracy, contend in prayer, because we fight the battle on our knees, and establish churches. Over 7 years, I sent out 26,869 of my members to plant a church in every nation of the world. We're the only church in Christian history to plant a church in 197 nations. This was done by normal people. If you're a pastor, I would be honored to teach you how to do it. Your church can send missionaries around the world. You can mobilize. My goal is to help you turn an audience into an army, to turn spectators into participators, to turn consumers into contributors, to turn members into missionaries and ministers. Number 5, we must apply God's word to ourselves. To finish the task, we're going to have to practice what we preach. Jesus says, go and do likewise. James says, be a doer of the word. The Great Commission says, teach them to do everything I've commanded, not teach them to know. The problem with the church today, we know more than we're doing. And there's a certain kind of preaching that will help people become doers of the word. I don't have time to get into that. But we must apply God's word to ourselves. If you want an example of this, look at Peter's message in Acts chapter 2. It started responding to a question of people. They said, what does this mean? And his sermon ended at the end by telling people what to do. When the people heard Peter's words, they asked, what shall we do? That's what your sermon should be. Start with, what does it mean? And end with, what should I do? The problem today, a lot of messages at the end, they're still going, what does it mean? You have to teach people to be doers of the word. To train people in how to be a doer of the word. Here's a little practical tip. Put a verb in every point. Put a verb in every point to be a doer of the word. Number 6, we must model love to the world. Love always attracts. My definition of evangelism, you build a bridge of love between your heart and theirs, and Jesus walks across. Growing churches love, loving churches grow. If you have a church that genuinely loves lost people, you'd have to lock the doors to keep people out. Now, a lot of people say we love, but they mean we love everybody we already know. That's not a loving church. Number 7.
Again, that is just an accusation against the church. He's slandering the brethren there, in my opinion. Again, Rick Warren is not a fan of the church. And he is someone that will attack the church. It's not the first time he's attacked the church. I believe he was also attacking the church back in 2020 over lockdowns and stuff like that. He bloviated himself at the Southern Baptist Convention in 2023. Or, sorry, it was at 2022. Where he bloviated, well, actually both years. He bloviated himself at the Southern Baptist Convention. So, this guy loves him some him. Like, he loves me some me, you know? That's the type of guy Rick Warren is. Very big ego. I'm the one who does it right, and, everyone else has been doing it wrong for so many years. The church was best at its infancy. We've just been going downhill for so long. We need people like me to tell everybody how to do it.
We must return to using homes. The fastest period of growth of the Christian church, first 330 years, we grew 50% a decade. We had no church buildings. I wanted to prove you don't have to have a church building to grow a church. So Saddleback went 13 years without a building. We had over 10,000 people coming every week before we built our first building. Don't tell me you have to have a building to grow a church. The fastest growth was through homes, and we need to go back to that.
This is a mathematically stupid point, by the way, because if you go from 1 to 100, you have 100 people, right? But you grew like 1,000%, or at least. So the percentages, it's called the law of diminishing returns. So going from 1 to 2 people is 100% growth. Going from 2 to 3 people is 50% growth. Diminishing returns, which each additional growth. That means that every time you grow, you're going to be growing by a smaller percentage. That means you're not growing as quickly as you did initially, because diminishing returns. I know I just, messed up the math on my initial point there. But law of diminishing returns. It is a dumb point to people who don't understand math to say that the church grew at the fastest rate in the first century, and therefore that was the best period in the church's history. That is just people who don't understand the law of diminishing returns, and people who don't understand economics, math, their intersection. I'll let them finish.
Number 8.
We're almost done.
Our worship must become a joyful witness. And all I'll say about this is that worship that is celebrative attracts unbelievers, just like they like to go to concerts. Number 9.
I mean, I actually agree with that point, but again, the way he described that point afterwards with that second sentence made it seem like, let's do a bunch of live music, let's make it about the presentation of the worship to attract people, is kind of where that second part, that subtitle went. But I actually agree with the point, but that he snuck something in there.
We must share everything to work together. Verse 44 says, all the believers shared everything with each other. All these things I'm teaching you are in Acts 1 or chapter 2. This is real collaboration. To collaborate means to co-labor. Number 10, we must make financial sacrifices.
I mean, that part about the sharing your stuff, again, that was a temporary situation in the book of Acts. It was not meant to be, the church was not meant to, have people sell all their things just to sustain the church for indefinitely, because that was not sustainable. Like, that's not the goal of the church, that people stop working just to sustain the church and sell all their possessions just to sustain the church. That's not sustainable. There's a reason why that starts out in Acts, but that doesn't continue everywhere they went after Acts, or after Acts 2, I should say.
Verse 45 says, they would sell their land and the things they owned in order to give the money to those who needed it. These are 10 things from Acts 1 and 2 that every one of you can do tomorrow on your way home from Lausanne. I love you, and may God bless you.
So that's Rick Warren's speech. Big highlights is he promotes female pastors and, conjures a new translation of the text in order to do it, and kind of words things in the most woke way possible. Maybe gets a little David Platt radical at the end, but there you have it. New argument for female pastors dropped by Rick Warren. You hate to see that, but it's not surprising. One last thing, though. He dressed horribly for that. He should be wearing a suit. Instead, he is in a t-shirt, and how's he in what looks like skinny jeans? But he's in a t-shirt that shows off his man boobs. It looks terrible, and making fun of his weight is completely fair game when he did the whole Daniel diet thing, and is still morbidly obese. So that is completely fair game. He should be dressed in a suit. He should be dressed like Steve Harvey on Family Feud. He's dressed horrible. He should be dressing professionally, not, showing off his man boobs. Last point I'll make. There we go. My name is Ray. It's the Evangelical Dark Web. If you'd like this kind of content, do also subscribe to the channel, to the podcast if you're new. Have a blessed day. Stay based. Christ is King. And we will catch you on the next one.